to the restoration of essential services, surgical services, when our people needed them most. Mr. President, I fully support this order and encourage my fellow members of this Honorable Senate to do likewise as we work to secure Jamaica's resilience and safeguard the health of our nation. Thank you, Mr. President, if it pleases you.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Thompson. Senator Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise in solidarity with the many Jamaicans whose lives have been disrupted by the passage of Hurricane Fiscal, a calamity that has left a deep mark on households, communities, and the local economies across the island. And we take an opportunity right now to express condolences to those who have died in the aftermath of the hurricane. Especially, Mr. President, those who died. No. I want to say that, Mr. President, especially those who died from leptospirosis. We know, Mr. President, that the hurricane did not simply damage infrastructure. It has placed an enormous financial, psychological, and emotional burden on thousands of Jamaicans who are already navigating the challenges of an economy that has not delivered the level of growth or the scale of opportunities that would permit them to achieve and sustain upward socioeconomic mobility. So yes, the moment calls for empathy. But more importantly, Mr. President, it calls for decisive and responsible action from those who shape national policy. Jamaicans are looking for a response that extends beyond immediate repairs and set the country on a trajectory for a stronger and more robust economy. Mr. President, it is against this backdrop that today's debate on the suspension of the fiscal rules takes on a real sense of national importance. So we must be clear about not only why the suspension is being sought and what it will allow the country to do at this moment, but what must follow if we are serious about long-term stability and growth. Mr. President, the anchor for fiscal rules has always been the legislated debt to GDP target, which measures the country's debt stock relative to the size of its economic output. The primary surplus requirement, the timelines embedded in law, were designed to ensure debt sustainability and, by extension, stable and predictable public finances. To recover from Hurricane Melissa, the country will take on additional debt, whether that is through the debt-creating instruments or disaster risk financing policy. That would be the IDB contingent credit line of US $300 million, or the World Bank CAT DDO of US $84 million, or accessing the US $3.6 billion in sovereign financing that was recently announced by the international financial institutions. At the same time, economic output, or GDP, is expected to contract this fiscal year as a direct result of the hurricane's impact. Consequently, Mr. President, the debt to GDP ratio is projected to increase and the pressure on finances will increase. It is important to note, Mr. President, that the debt, you'll see, the debt to GDP ratio is a target that is not simply about the absolute stock of public debt. It is about the debt in relation to the size of the economy. A larger growing economy makes the same level of debt easier to manage. Conversely, if the economy contracts while the debt rises, sustainability is immediately threatened. It is precisely here, Mr. President, that the connection between debt sustainability and the strength and quality of our economy becomes critical. How we grow, the sectors that we invest in, and the opportunities that we create will determine not just our ability to manage the debt, but also, and I'll use a term that I know will resonate with them, the broader prosperity and resilience of the nation. So, Mr. President, when we support the suspension of the fiscal rules, we're acknowledging that some temporary and necessary fiscal flexibility is. But this is not a license for unfocused borrowing or expenditure. It must be paired, Mr. President, with a clear strategic plan for sustainable growth. Every dollar borrowed and spent must be directed towards initiatives that generate measurable economic impact, whether through infrastructure, technology, agriculture, education, or industrial development. In doing so, Mr. President, we ensure that the debt that we take on now supports not just the immediate recovery, but a more sustainable economy in the years ahead. We have learned some lessons from the hurricane. Mr. President, the hurricane has reminded us of the vulnerabilities within our economy. Even though we faced a Category 5 hurricane, which is one of the most intense tropical cyclones to ever pass through the Caribbean, these vulnerabilities were not created by the hurricane alone. They point to deeper structural weaknesses in our economy. Our economy still relies on a narrow set of industries. Our infrastructure is weak, aging, and suboptimal, Mr. President. That is the economy that they on that side have presided over. Productivity, Mr. President, remains low, and our capacity to absorb shocks is limited, Mr. President. Jamaica's old development model is exhausted. It cannot generate growth, the employment, and the opportunity that the people of Jamaica want. So, Mr. President, it is factual. It relies too heavily on a few traditional sectors and produces low-value output. It fails to equip our human resources for a modern, dynamic economy, and it leaves the country vulnerable to shocks. Rebuilding along the same lines would waste the opportunity to reset our economic trajectory and deliver higher incomes and better living standards. So, Mr. President, it's very clear that we need a new approach, one that is bold, strategic, and forward-looking. A model that invests in high-value sectors, integrates the technology, and strengthens productivity. And we must build climate adaptive capacity into infrastructure and economic planning. And Mr. President, I listened very keenly to the finance minister in Parliament on Tuesday, and from her utterance, I understand why growth has been so dismal under their administration. Mr. President, meaningful change must first begin with the acknowledgement by those entrusted with managing the economy that we cannot continue on the current path. So when I heard the finance minister on Tuesday saying that the economy was surging before Hurricane Melissa, I wondered to myself if we were living in the same economy. She said it. Mr. President, I presume. Mr. President, I'm seeking your protection. I presume that the minister was referring to the PIOJ's estimate of a 4.6% growth in the third quarter of 2025. But let us be clear, Mr. President, this is not evidence of a genuine surge. It reflects a rebound from the sharp contraction caused by Hurricane Beryl in the same quarter of 2024. So what is happening is that the headline number from PIOJ minister, and I know you will be familiar, APCA not so much, but you will understand that the number is being lifted. The headline number, Mr. President, is being lifted by recovery from a low production base last year. It is not implying an underlying acceleration in economic activity. And it's the same narrative we heard from that side prior to the arrival of Hurricane Beryl last year. The same narrative was repeated last year. We were told that the economy was performing well before the hurricane arrived. But the data shows that the economy was slowing for 3 consecutive quarters, represented a deceleration before the arrival of Hurricane Beryl. And I have a chart that I prepared that I wanted to display to you. I wanted you to see the economy that your government presided over last year that represented. Look at that. So look at that. Abka, look carefully. So Hurricane Beryl came in the third quarter of 2024. But prior to that, you saw that even though we recorded positive growth figures, it was positive figures at a declining rate. So we had decelerating positive economic growth, Mr. President. But we got further. Again, we heard the same narrative before COVID-19. So they told us that the economy was doing well before COVID-19. But in reality, Mr. President, the economy was already in decline before the pandemic arrived in the first quarter of 2020. In 2019, the economic growth fell quarter over quarter. April to June 2019, growth was 1.3%. July to September 2019, it fell to 0.6%. October to 2019, Marlon, the economy stagnated, 0% growth. So the idea that they keep repeating, Mr. President, that the economy was doing well and was only disrupted by an external shock is not true. Because clearly, according to the data, if there had not been a shock, then the economy would have ground to a halt, 0%. So it's clear, Mr. President, that the growth strategy from that administration has been ineffective. So, Mr. President, the path forward requires a different approach. Borrowing and expenditure must be purposeful and directed at interventions that strengthen the economy. We on this side are not just interested in patching the economy. So while there is no single solution to the structural challenges that we face, one thing is certain, Mr. Speaker. The state must take, Mr. President, I'll catch on, I have 5 more years in here and beyond. And then in 2030, I'll be over there. In 2030, I'll be over there. Right, Mr. President? So we're on this side. We're not interested in just patching the economy. The state must take an active role and they must set clear priorities, removing the obstacles. But there's something to be done. Ask about prescriptions, man. I'm going to give you the prescriptions. Mr. President, I'm very happy that they are engaged and interested in what I'm saying. So we have to look at efficiency, Mr. President. The hurricane showed that our systems, whether in government, business, or communities, are inefficient. We don't have much margin in error. That's just factual. Simply spending more money won't solve these problems. You can't just throw money at a broken system and expect them to automatically work better. To get better results, people, businesses, government agencies need to use resources more efficiently. And this involves, Mr. President, improving processes, making workflows faster, simpler, and less wasteful. Productivity must be the order of the day going forward, Mr. President. So productivity is what convert the resources that we're going to use in the recovery process into lasting growth. If we just borrow more money, Mr. President, without improving productivity, we'll only increase debt without actually improving living standards. Mr. President, if we are serious about meaningful growth, we cannot ignore the way the government actually spends money. In cases where the country has funds to spend, and Senator Small Ferguson alluded to it, the execution has failed. So the state, as operated under their government, clearly has an implementation deficit problem, Mr. President. In fiscal year 2024-2025, the government underspent the capital budget by $19 billion, Minister. The year before that, it underspent it by nearly $9 billion. And the first quarter of the current fiscal year, only half of the allocated $40.5 billion was spent. So while these just sound like numbers, they represent critical projects linked to higher growth opportunities that were stalled. Schools remained unfinished, roads still in despair, and communities waiting for basic services. Projects stall because the government's procurement system is slow, administrative processes are weak, and agencies lack the capacity to manage the projects. The result, Mr. Speaker, is that money that is meant to stimulate growth in the economy simply sits idly by. So, Mr. President, if we are to build a more robust economy, this has to change. The state must fit its implementation deficit. This means fixing procurement, strengthening project management, paying contractors on time, and building capacity in government agencies. So, Mr. President, we have to go beyond that. I've been on the ground, and I would appreciate the presentation, Minister, but I've been hearing some rumbling from micro, small, and medium enterprises. They don't think that much has been happening for them. So the systems may exist, Mr. President, but I don't think we're seeing the output or the outcome that was desired. So I know when I point out these challenges, we're going to hear from them that, oh, we have a program designed for this, and something was done already. But the fact is that we are not seeing the desired outcome. And if we're not seeing the desired outcome, it means that there's a flaw in the process. So, Mr. President, beyond the immediate support provided to help businesses recover from the hurricane's impact, there must be sustained efforts to enable MSMEs to scale, innovate, and compete in a modern economy. One of the biggest challenges MSMEs are facing, Mr. President, is access to finance. It is a legitimate concern. And if you engage with the Small Business Association, the Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprise Alliance, they will tell you that, well, Mr. President, Minister, you're probably not listening very keenly, because they will tell you that whilst the programs exist, the programs are inefficient, and it takes an inordinate amount of time for an actual result to happen. And this is backward, and this is unproductive, and this will not enable micro, small, and medium enterprises to scale, Mr. President. So that is precisely why the state have to play a more creative role, Mr. President. The programs that have been designed must be made to work, Mr. President. We're also concerned about the loan structure at the Development Bank of Jamaica. There are many other MSMEs, Mr. President. The current system needs reform to make accessing DBJ loans more practical and attractive for small businesses. So, Mr. President, what we are seeing is that a solution is needed. And we have to address the deeper structural and strategic priorities that will make the entire economy stronger and more resilient. But with respect to how we prepare for the future, because, Mr. President, the reality is that climate shocks will continue to be a feature of our future. If you listen to the studies, they will tell you that as a result of accelerating global warming, we're expected, Mr. President, to face higher and more intense tropical cyclones. So, extreme hydrological events will increasingly define the Caribbean's future. Hurricanes, floods, tropical storms are no longer a once-in-a-generation shock. They are recurring features of our future. Each event not only damages lives and livelihoods, but sets back normal development by years, sometimes decades. In this context, our approach to borrowing must evolve. We cannot simply rely on traditional debt instruments that leave us exposed to these climate risks. We need more borrowing arrangements that are explicitly incorporating climate resilience, agreements that provide immediate, flexible liquidity when extreme events occur. Specifically, Mr. President, I'm suggesting that we begin to think about pursuing the inclusion of debt pause clauses in our sovereign borrowing arrangements. That's not something I would expect to hear from that side because they don't have the ingenuity necessary to move us beyond the current slump that we're in, Mr. President. Right. So these clauses
Senator, I allow you a lot of latitude.
I'm wrapping up, Mr. President.
I allow you a lot of latitude because Lambert, I allow you.
I'm wrapping up. So these clauses.
I allow you a lot of gratitude.
I'm wrapping up, Mr. President.
Senator Brown, give me a break now, man. I allow you a lot of latitude because I'm enjoying your presentation. But remember, you related to the regulation before.
Right, it is. And what I said, Mr. President. So these clauses would temporarily suspend debt service obligations during declared disasters, unlocking immediate critical liquidity when it's most needed. So such arrangements are feasible with multilateral and bilateral partners, including international financial institutions who are sensitive to development challenges and Jamaica's high exposure to climate risk. While the private markets may not yet have an appetite for this, IFIs can structure financing that both protects the economy and incentivizes stability. Countries in the Caribbean have done it, such as Barbados, which has already adopted similar mechanisms, demonstrating the practicality and effectiveness. So, Mr. President, when I mean we need to be more climate resilient in our borrowing, I'm speaking about pursuing tools that strengthen Jamaica's capacity to respond to disasters. So, Mr. President, the temporary suspension of the fiscal rules is not an end in itself. It is a tool, an opportunity to act decisively to address the immediate consequences of Hurricane Melissa, but also to lay the foundation for a more robust Jamaica. We have seen time and time again that disasters weaken our economy, in our infrastructure and our institution, but they also offer us a chance to reset. I would urge the government to exercise a higher degree of ingenuity so we can actually seize the opportunity to move beyond where we are and to recover stronger. Thank you, Mr. President.